One of the most fascinating questions that we grapple with are the relative value of mitzvot. For example, which type of mitzvot are more important? Mitzvot ben adam lemakom, those mitzvot that govern our relationship with God, or mitzvot ben adam lechavero, those mitzvot which govern our relationship with other people. I'd like to share with you an insight into this week's Torah portion from Naftali Tzvi Yehua Berlin, known as the NeTziV, which offers an amazing answer to this question. Just a little bit about Naftali Tzvi Yehua Berlin, known as the NeTziV. He was born in Russia in 1816 and died in Warsaw, Poland in 1893. He was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, which was the largest institution of its kind from 1854 to 1892. There's a lot of debate and discussion around the leadership of the yeshiva. There was contested leadership of the yeshiva while he was there. The yeshiva was also closed down at some point by the Russian authorities. We're not going to get into those details, but Naftali Tzvi Yehua Berlin is known for many things. One of the things he's known for is his very insightful commentary on the Torah. He gave which was unique in that he gave a Parshat Hashavua class, a Chumash class in the yeshiva in Volozhin every week, and the Torah commentary that we have are notes from those Parshat Hashavua classes. In this week's Torah reading, and if you want to get a Chumash to follow along, please pause the video to grab a Chumash for a moment. This week's Torah reading is Parshat Vayeira, and we're going to be focusing on the aftermath of Sarah being taken captive by Avimelech. The Torah tells us in chapter 20 of the book of Bereishit that God comes to Avimelech and says to him, "Listen, you started up with the wrong woman. You better let her go. If you don't, I'm going to kill you." And in chapter 20, verse 6. We have the psukim as follows: Vayomer elav Elohim b'chalom, gam anochi yadati ki b'tam levavcha asita zot, ve'echsoch gam anochi otcha mechato li al kein lo zaticha lingoa aleha. Avimelech says to God, who came to him very angry. Avimelech says, "Listen, God, I didn't do anything. I didn't know that she was Abraham's wife, nor have I done anything." And God says, I know you didn't do anything. And I know you haven't done anything wrong, and which is why I didn't harm you. And then towards the end of the episode, we have the following in verse 7. V'ata hashev eshet ha'ish. God says to Avimelech, "Now therefore restore the man's wife, ki navihu, because he is a prophet. Vayitpalel ba'adcha, and he shall pray for you, and you shall live." So we have a number of questions that arise from this. So God tells Avimelech to give Sarah back to Abraham, and that Abraham's prayer on behalf of Avimelech is going to work to make sure that Avimelech is not punished. That is why, according to Rashi, the Torah says, "Ki navihu." It's very strange, right? God says to Avimelech, "Give Sarah back because he's a Navi." Well, what if he wasn't a Navi? Does that mean that Avimelech would not have to return Sarah back? So the Gemara deals with this in one way. Rashi deals with this as well, and Rashi says, "V'yodea shelo nagat ba." The fact is, Avram's a Navi, and he knows that you did not touch Sarah. Therefore, he's going to pray for you. So God is basically giving Avimelech an insurance policy. Don't worry, Avimelech. Nothing's going to happen to you. Avram's going to pray for you. And the way that you should know that Abraham's prayer is going to work, ki navihu, he's a prophet. The Torah is not suggesting, or God's not saying, only give back Sarah because Avram's a prophet. The Torah is telling Avimelech, God is telling Avimelech, why Avram's prayer is going to work. Avram's prayer is going to work because it's going to be a full-hearted prayer, because since he's a Navi, he knows that you did not touch his wife. So that's very nice, but it still begs the question, and this is the NeTziv's question. V'lo nitba'er adayin lama hu tzarich letfilah. Right? If Avimelech did not touch Sarah to begin with, why is he in need of Abraham's prayer, of Abraham's intercession to save his life? After all, Avimelech didn't do anything wrong. He didn't sin and didn't touch her. So, in order to answer this question, which is really a very, very good question, why would Avimelech need anyone's prayer for his well-being if he didn't do anything wrong? He did not molest Sarah. So in order to answer this question, the NeTziV turns to a Mishnah on Tzadi Bet Amud Aleph in Masechet Bava Kama. In the tractate Bava Kama, the Mishnah says, Afal pi shehu notein lo, ein nimcha lo ad shivakesh mimenu. That if someone causes injury, let's say, to someone's property, that the person is not forgiven, the person who did the injury is not forgiven until he asks for forgiveness. And the Mishnah's proof text is our story, that even after Avimelech, presumably, is going to give back Sarah to Abraham, there still needs to be some sort of reconciliation. And the Gemara goes on to explain that the reconciliation may not be for the damages, because in the Gemara's case, the damages have been repaid, and in our case, there were no damages to begin with, because Avimelech didn't touch Sarah. So what needs to be reconciled? The Gemara says the reconciliation is for the tsar, is for the pain and the angst caused, in the case of the Mishnah, by the injury to the property, and in our case, the pain and the uncomfortable feelings that Avimelech caused Abraham by taking Sarah. So even though Sarah was not molested, and it seems like Avimelech would not need any intercession, any prayer on his behalf, the NeTziV is teaching us that in fact Abraham did have to pray on his behalf, because since Avimelech caused Abraham tsar, emotional discomfort, that was his sin, and that required forgiveness. That is almost a good answer, but still begs one more question. If the problem is that Avimelech caused tsar, discomfort, or some sort of emotional upset to Abraham, it seems that it's not prayer that's needed, but rather it seems that Avimelech has to ask Avram for forgiveness. So what should happen is Avimelech should give Sarah back to Abraham and say, Abraham, you know I didn't touch her because you are a prophet. I also am sorry for the tsar, for the distress, emotional distress that I caused you while Sarah was in my custody. But that's not what happens. What the Torah records is that Avram has to pray to intercede to make sure that God does not kill Avimelech. So what's going on here? So the NeTziV now answers, and this is the bombshell of the NeTziV. Mikan, lamdu sha'achotei ben adam lechaveiro, hu chet ben adam l'shamayim gamkein. That when someone sins in their relationship with another person, when someone caused another human being distress, that is also considered a sin against God. Ukishem mitpayes, continues the NeTziV, ukishem mitpayes me ha'adam, and when the person reconciles with the individual that they hurt, adayin nitzrach levakesh kapara me'akadosh baruch hu. They still have to ask for forgiveness from God. Mishum hachi nitzrach letfilat Abraham sheyihiyeh mechol lo. Therefore, Avimelech still required Abraham's prayer on his behalf so that God would forgive him. So this is really very beautiful. We're learning here how to understand the psukim. Avimelech takes Sarah, doesn't touch her, seems like he's off the hook, but he's not really off the hook because he caused Abraham some tsar, and Sarah too as well, I should have mentioned, considerable distress. So Avimelech not only has to give back Sarah to Abraham. He also has to ask Abraham for forgiveness for the tsar that he caused him, but that is not the end of Avimelech's responsibilities. Avimelech also has sinned against God. Where did Avimelech sin against God? Says the NeTziV, every single time that someone sins against a human being, that is also a sin against God. And therefore, that also requires some sort of reconciliation between the sinner and God. So certainly Avimelech reconciled with Abraham. Had he not reconciled with Abraham, none of this would have worked. He wouldn't have been forgiven at all. But he also had to reconcile with God, and that's where Abraham steps in. So the general principle we're learning here is about the serious nature of sins against other people. Not only are they counted as sins against other people, they're also considered as sins against God. So if you want to weigh, and maybe this is one way to answer the question I started with, what is a more serious sin? If one wants to weigh what is more serious, either a sin against God or a sin against a human being, one answer would be this. A sin against God is only a sin against God. That's just one, let's say, minus in one's column. But a sin against a human being is a sin against a human being, that's one minus, and a sin against God, that's two negatives, if you will. We could flip it around and say a positive act done towards God is a positive act towards God, but perhaps a positive act done for another person is a positive act towards that person, and it's also considered in God's book a positive act towards him. So here the NeTziV not only helps us understand the flow of the psukim, but through that teaches us a very important principle, and how important it is for us to be careful not to sin against other people, because in so doing, we are also sinning in God, and how careful against God, and how careful we have to be in our relationships with other people. So perhaps after listening to this, we could take a few moments to consider how we could implement this very important principle that the NeTziV teaches in our life, and be extra careful to make sure that we are treating our fellow human beings properly. On that note, I will add, talking about taking care of our fellow human beings, there are opportunities for us to help with those who were in the wake of the storm, Hurricane Sandy, are suffering. I'm going to try to attach a link to this video, but if not, please let me know, and I will email you a link to organizations that are offering help to those who suffered from the storm, remembering that good we do for them counts as good we do for them, and also good we do for God. I hope you enjoyed the shiur. I look forward to your feedback. Have a wonderful day.